some quick introductions on my side. So I am Catherine Haskins, and I am the founder of the Bridge Club. If you have not yet met me, I am not a DVM nor a technician. I am just incredibly passionate about this profession and have been in it for over 25 years. Believe it or not, I know, getting a long time. But what I'm very fortunate to have is Dr. Cheryl Good. Can you raise your hand and introduce, say hello? She is our Chief Medical Officer. She is in practice in Michigan. And what is so great about Cheryl is, one, she is one of the founding members of the VVCA. She is incredibly instrumental across the profession and is an immediate past president. Is that right?
No, not immediate. I'm past president.
Oh, just past president.
I'm a past president.
For
NABC. Yeah.
So she is definitely an insider here and provides to make sure that we stay on the critical path of what is needed in this profession. I also could not do any of this without Shannon Nowak, and Shannon is our VP of Education. And what does that mean? Because she's an RVT, LVT, and has her BS. Not bullshitter, she really is really grounded. She is the one who really helps keep us grounded and making sure that we are going after those hard questions. So sometimes you wonder, gosh, that kind of came out of there. That's Shannon helps us with that and making sure we stay really focused. And she also helps lead a lot of our pet owner conversations as well. So Shannon, and oh, she's on the board for the North Carolina Veterinary Association. So I do a board member, right?
Yeah, secretary.
And if you ever need her for a good board, she's really amazing. I just highly encourage it.
And okay. happy early Vet Tech Week.
Yeah.
Vet Techs. I know it's next week, but I had to say it since we're in this nice forum with everybody. Thank you. Thank you.
That is awesome. I love seeing a full screen. This is fantastic. Tina, so good to see you. I'm glad that you were able to join us tonight. As we go through, I'm sure we're going to have many familiar faces jumping on as we are having our conversation. Tonight's conversation is, oh, hey, Julie, is all about telehealth, telemedicine, whatever you want to put behind the word, but within veterinary medicine. So much has happened over the course of the last 3 years. It seems like it just happened yesterday, but if you think pre-COVID, all of COVID, and where we are today is totally different. The VVCA was formed during COVID, so it just shows you how fast things are happening. We were just at VIS. I was not at Banfield, but I understand this also was a hot topic at Banfield. Conversations are coming up more and more, and it seems we keep staying in one kind of spot, but it's a bigger topic overall. So tonight we're going to dive into it. I promise you, I am not keeping you over 55 minutes. For those who want to stay longer, you certainly can, but it is really important to us that we honor your time as well. That is one of the reasons that telemedicine exists, is to help honor your time as we go forward. I'm very fortunate to have one of my, what I would call a very good friend of mine, Mark Cushing, who is the founder, one of the founders of VVCA, but also the CEO and founder of the Animal Policy Group. An incredible supporter of the Bridge Club, but more importantly, the biggest partner in this profession to help move really important topics forward. So I just want to say, Mark, really quick, thank you for your service and care, but don't jump in yet. I'm not turning it over to you yet. I also want to say we have Dr. Audrey Wystrach, who is the founder of PetFolk. If you've not been paying attention to this, I highly encourage you, just really quick, Google it. She is innovating pet care at the local level for individuals and pet owners and the profession itself. She also is an innovator within telehealth and telemedicine. We're just going to keep throwing all the words together because I know it's confusing all of us, me in particular. So she will be jumping in as well. We have Deb Leon, who is the founder of Whiskerdocs. What you may not know, wickedly cool about Deb, is that Deb actually started on the human side. So I think we have a lot to learn from Miss Deb as she comes forward. And then to add in her sprinkles of brilliance, we have Dr. Eleanor Green, who is the former dean for Texas A&M and a consultant with the Animal Policy Group. So I am so excited. Tonight is going to be the bomb. So get ready, everybody, because we're going to start first, as we always do, with a toast. So Mark, now I'll turn it to you.
Wow, that's I'm ready to go, Catherine. And first of all, thank you for the Bridge Club and letting Animal Policy Group be welcomed as a sponsor. The toast is real simple. It's to everybody on this call I know has an open mind. And I appreciate everyone who's had an open mind for 6 years and looked at telemedicine in the veterinary
Okay.
space. Because it takes an open mind to understand it. And so to open minds, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Cheers.
Again, if you have anyone talking in the background, mute yourself. Otherwise, you guys can all be unmuted as we go through tonight's conversation. But I thought it'd be best if we start first with Mark, because I wanted to kind of go through, there seems to be a lot of going on. Some states can do some things, some states can't do other things, and a lot changed during COVID. So I want to kind of give it over to Mark just for a quick overview of like what has been happening, where are we, and how quickly did the shift turn within telehealth?
Thanks. And when I'm finished, I'll hand it to two people that really know what they're talking about, Audrey Wystrach and Deb Leon, who, along with others who are board members of VBCA, are going to talk about real case scenarios that you all can think about and react to. And we may even get into what's different between telemedicine and telehealth, but we won't start with that. So telehealth and telemedicine really started in the veterinary space in January of 2016. So we're 6.5 years into it. So where are we? What have we accomplished in 6 years? And I think I always start with this. Human medicine has fully embraced telemedicine in all 50 states. So sitting here in October of 2022, in every state, you can get medicine and medical care via digital means. It's legal, it's encouraged, it's accepted practice. We're not quite so far yet in veterinary medicine. We have 7 states where you can operate comfortably within the telemedicine and telehealth realm or telemedicine realm. I'll mention those states by name in a minute, but 7 isn't 1, it's not 2, but 7's not 25 or 30 or 40. But I'll make a prediction and I'll buy really good wine for people if I lose this. Telemedicine will be adopted in veterinary medicine in every state in the lives of at least someone watching this show, because you will not be able to, just as human medicine was not able to stop consumer demand to have healthcare the way people want to receive it. And if it's good for people, a lot of people say, why wouldn't it be good for pets? And on that note, an interesting thing last year that you all ought to bear in mind, you hear argument from critics sometimes that, well, pets can't talk, nor can 1-year-olds. And the Pediatric Society of the United States issued a substantive, lengthy report last year, unreservedly endorsing telemedicine, not as a future good idea for pediatric care in the United States, but as a current vital means of delivering healthcare for the same reasons that we talk about in veterinary medicine. So I think that argument has probably less weight than it used to. Now, when you talk to the profession and industry, you will hear critics and skeptics, but mainly what you'll hear are people that have, I think, in their case, legitimate fears and legitimate sort of speculation about what could happen, the wrong or the harm that might happen, that somehow veterinary medicine will harm pets. And the good news is, since the day we started VBCA 3.5 years ago, or 2.5 years ago, we now have no record of a single complaint filed with a single veterinary medical board in the US of an injury to any pet due to the use of telemedicine. More importantly, 17 states during COVID introduced emergency rules that permitted, you'll recall this if you're in one of those states, that basically exempted the traditional VCPR requirement during COVID for social distancing reasons, right? We want to encourage telemedicine rather than coming into the clinic. And none of those 17 states had a single complaint raised that any pet was harmed or injured during that. We have a good friend of ours and a sponsor of VBCA, Sharon Quinn, who's a personal friend of mine, who's a leading Ontario, Canada veterinarian, and also the founder of SmartVet. Ontario, 15 million people, has had telemedicine, full throttle telemedicine, for 4.5 years. Well, 4 years and 5 months. I'm a lawyer, so I always round up. But 4 years and 5 months, full throttle. A lot of you heard Jan Robinson, the executive director of what would be the Ontario board, who came to AVMA and was part of a 3-hour program we put on. And she was asked a question there and answered as she always has. There hasn't been a single complaint in 4 years and 5 months in Ontario about any harm to a pet or any injury to a pet due to telemedicine. So at that point, you do have to pause, don't you? And say, whatever the rational basis for the fears and speculation and kind of threats of what might happen, we have pretty robust laboratories now. And pet owners in this country and in Canada haven't been afraid to complain if a veterinarian does something that harms their pets. And we all know that. Sometimes they're made up complaints, sometimes they're very legitimate complaints. But complete silence is a fact that I think has to be at the front end of any thinking about this telemedicine makes sense in the veterinary space. And I just can't get around that argument. If I was up against the argument that there's been no harm, then I'd have to pause and wonder if the speculation has any foundation. And in the 7 states, which I wasn't hiding them, but I'll tell you what they are, where telemedicine can be practiced much more freely, in particular in those states, again, no complaints to a board of any injury to a pet. And at some point you're sort of forced to say, is that just sheer coincidence? Is it just purely accidental? Did people not have a laptop or a cell phone? They don't know how to complain? And I think the answer is no. Those states are what? Idaho, Michigan, New York, New Jersey, Virginia, Florida. In a limited case, you can't prescribe, but in Florida and Oklahoma. Those states amount to around 70, 75 million Americans, which gets you pretty close to 20% of the American population. So in total number of people, the 7 states counts for quite a bit, but we obviously aren't at anywhere near a majority of states yet. I think what happened 2 weeks ago in Portland at the Veterinary Innovation Summit and at the Banfield Summit was telling, because 2 issues intersected, really 3 issues intersected. The acute shortage, chronic shortage, I would predict probably permanent shortage of veterinarians and vet techs or vet nurses, affecting everything in every practice, from morale, from healthcare, from wellness to inability of pet owners to get care, access to care, particularly for diverse populations and underserved populations and low income, where you literally can't get in to see a vet. And then telemedicine. And those 3 topics wove through so many of the talks and speeches. And it was very clear in that audience, and it was a diverse audience, that it's hard to talk about access to care issues. It's hard to talk about chronic shortage issues and not being able to get into a clinic and not consider telemedicine a tool that one might want to keep and maintain as a legal tool to get healthcare. And if you're an individual, and I'm preaching here, that's the privilege of being a sponsor. If you are an individual who cannot get in to see a vet, the arguments against telemedicine are theoretical and academic. And trust me, they will not stop you from finding somebody somewhere, somehow, that'll tell you what to do for your dog or cat who's sick and maybe even dying, to get extreme about it. So the point is, reality has a way of impinging on the law sometimes, and it has a way of forcing itself into the political world. And I think we're beginning to see that much more dramatically in telemedicine. I also think the evidence is that regular clients of clinics that get in to see care firsthand are enjoying telemedicine. And I think Sharon Quinn could tell you that in Ontario. They like the convenience of having their doctor or their clinic help them out if they need to without coming in, though they may come in once or twice a year as that's appropriate. And I think Audrey is going to speak to that. So where do we end up now? We do have a debate. I'm going to say the VCPR word or phrase. We do have a debate, and it's a fundamental debate. And we're kind of at the 50-yard line. There's pretty good team on one side and pretty good team on the other side. The AVMA and 20 state VMAs and a handful of companies have weighed in on, you cannot have a telemedicine VCPR. You can only create a relationship with a veterinarian in person. You have the VVCA, the American Association of Vet State Boards, Veterinary Innovation Council, and a number of companies and organizations on the other side of the 50-yard line saying, no, that should be up to the veterinarian herself to decide, can I help you in a digital, electronic communication format? Can I help you and help your pet? And if I'm comfortable and you're comfortable, I'm going to go ahead and do it. That's the last debate, really. And that debate will probably play out state by state for some time. I wish I could tell you it'll be wrapped up by Christmas, but not a chance of that. So that's kind of where we are. That's the landscape. Obviously, I'm a proponent. So if it sounded like I'm a fan of telemedicine. It's only because I am. But now I think we'd like to have, if it's okay, Catherine, I don't know whether you want to make the handoff to Audrey and Deb Leon, who can
So
each.
Mark,
Yeah.
Catherine had a power surge and she's trying to dial back in. Oh, there she is. She's starting to come back in now. I don't know if we're gonna pop over to Audrey and them right now, or did you want to talk about the current legislative
Well,
efforts?
I think that, to tell you the truth, we don't know yet what states are going to be active in 2023. We're only, 2 months or 2.5 months from January. But those two teams at the 50-yard line aren't playing all their cards. So we'll just see which states show up. But I think you're going to see more activity for sure. And Catherine, I think at this point, I think the audience would probably enjoy the most to have Audrey and Deb.
Yeah, so sorry about that. I had a little wonderful power surge as with that wonderful weather coming through. But what we want to do first, before we went to Dr. Audrey, I thought it might be really interesting to hear from Deb Leon, because Deb's been doing this for how many years now, Deb?
I don't want to say. I think we talked decades, but yeah, we don't.
So,
couple
so what I'd
decades.
like from her perspective
two,
of an organization that actually is doing this versus private practice, I'd love to go through and have her explain to us what changed during COVID. And then I want us to do something we haven't done before whenever we talk about telehealth. And I want to talk about the pet owner and what has changed from the pet owner's perspective and what they're expecting. So first, can you kind of walk through, before we go to the private practice with Dr. Audrey, can you kind of walk through from a Whiskerdocs perspective, like what changed over the course of the last couple of years?
Yeah, and I love, Mark, you'll love this, because I think everything you said, it dovetails right off. The data is absolutely backing up everything Mark said. Those three key issues that were at VIS are just so present in how we're in the interactions we're getting. So for those of you who don't know, we get about 100,000 interactions a year, and we're data driven. So it gives us a really good look at trends now, since we've been doing this for about 7 years in the pet space. And what we're seeing now is something new that we didn't expect, something that used to be very rare and now has become more and more common. And that is that the gap in care and the ability to get in, the lack of availability has become the reason people are calling. So let me just say, so people would typically call and say, my dog's, acting funny, or my cat's whatever. And so that would be our starting point. Today, our starting point is often, I already tried to get in and I can't. So we're starting at, I can't get help. And so what's happening is we notice how many conversations are starting like that. We're having to change the way we gather our data, because now that's becoming, and I mentioned this at VIS a bit, that because they can't get in, and by the way, this is not about money and it's not about geography. So I'm talking about another thing that's happened in the veterinary shortage. And I too, like Mark, I don't believe it's going to go away. Maybe never, maybe ever, because we are seeing so much resistance from some of the powers that be about the solutions that came in human healthcare to fix the same gap that happened. And those were things like elevating the role of the nurse and things like that. So the bottom line is, as at VIS, it was like a thing on the stage. I was talking about this and I went, oh my God, we're talking about not just a problem, but we're talking about a risk factor. So when we think of what is a risk factor, as we start to look long-term into, how we approach healthcare for pets and wellness programs and all that, you would normally talk about genetics, breed, age, diet, things like that. We're seeing availability or lack thereof of becoming a major risk factor. And so all the good work we're doing, and Mark, I think this just dovetail, you just kind of hit this already, and we just see it from this perspective of the problem that exists today. It isn't going away, it's getting worse. People can't get help if they have money, if they have pet insurance, if they're all those things, if they're compliant. So we're starting to have to actually then deliver care differently. So not only are we gathering data differently, but we're starting to realize that part of our job, a huge portion, is what we're calling resource management, finding finding solutions for I can't get in, right? I can't get anywhere. I just adopted a new dog and no one will see me. Or my dog just developed a huge an eye infection and it's serious, and I can't get into a specialist. This is really rampant, and I can't even stress how scary it is for us when we see that change in our data. So I think this is going to be extremely important for us to take into consideration as we think about how do we meet the need of the pet owner, because frankly, they're not happy. And I know, Catherine, we talked about this a little bit, so I'll just go right into the business,
Perfect.
right? Because you know, we most of our clients are actually businesses that actually have large populations of pet owners and therefore pets, of course. And so we've just done a couple major conferences, and all of a sudden they're talking about this. They're talking about it and they're starting to go, what is going to be done? All they know right now from so many of these member groups, companies, corporations who have members, employees, customers, they know pet insurance and they know dog walking. They don't have any clue about pet telehealth, pet telemedicine, and what's available to them. And they want to help solve the problem because they're starting to see the effect on their employees, their members of the stress of lack of availability. They're wanting to get pet friendly and now people can't get help. So they were actually talking at it at places that don't even think about pets. Yes, vet techs are the solution. They are one of the huge solutions. And for people on the human side, frankly, they're baffled. They're absolutely baffled that all these solutions have happened already on the human side and they're not even started over here. So we have work ahead of us.
Well, I do think what's so interesting about this, and then I'm going to ask for Nicole to go ahead and start to unmute herself, because Nicole's going to jump in on this and help give some scenarios from this kind of call-in component, is you did mention the pet owner at VIS, but in typical conversations or even articles that are written in our trade publications, we're not hearing that voice. I feel like a lot of it is us talking to ourselves and talking about resources and things of that nature, instead of what the true demand is from that pet owner. They're now seeking it out. And if they can't get it from you, they're going to go somewhere else, and they're going to continue to go down the line until they find what they're specifically looking for. So we really do need to look closely at what the pet owner is needing as we go forward. And I promise you, we will still talk about our hurdles after we kind of go through all of this, because there are quite a few that we've got in front of us. But I'm inviting now Deb's number 2, if you will, with Whiskerdocs, and also one of the most amazing veterinary technicians. We are fortunate in this profession to have so many that are absolutely incredible. But Nicole Rogers, I'm going to have her come forward, and she's going to give us a scenario that they experience. And what I would like you to do is raise your hand, and how would you answer it? Would you both, agree to be able, how would you solve it? So I'm going to hand it over to Nicole, and then we'll do a second scenario with her before we go to Dr. Audrey, for Audrey to talk about what's been happening in private practice, and then go through some scenarios there. So Nicole.
Great. Okay. So I'm going to do this sort of in quiz format because I think it's a little bit more fun. So it's really common. I want to give a little bit of company background before I say this, before I get into the scenario, in saying that we focus more on the telehealth, teleeducation, tele-triage side of the line. So that's our primary focus. So when I'm presenting these cases, we're talking about what is presented to us at the onset of an interaction, whether that's a phone call or a chat. So having said that, we get a call at 9 o'clock at night on a Wednesday of all days. And those are our busier days during the week, or Tuesday through Thursday, pretty much. So we get a call from a woman saying that her 7-month-old puppy has had vomiting and diarrhea for 3 days. Stop right there and give anyone the opportunity who would like to take it, chime in and say, what do you think that pet needed? Just based on what I've told you.
You'll have to unmute yourselves and speak out loud.
Parvo test. Parvo test.
Okay. Parvo test.
Parvo test.
Anything
Anyone
else?
Want to chime in?
I'd love to see a little more history. What's the puppy been doing?
That is a great point. Absolutely great point. So our process at Whiskerdocs is to kind of start at the most acute, right? And work our way backwards. So we've got something that could be parvo, to Serena's point, right? And we've got to work backwards to rule that out. Here's what we do know. Pet owners are generally very, if they're calling us, they're very concerned. So that's why we always kind of start at that level. In going in, our number one concern in that situation is going to be to work up the extent of the vomiting, right? So we start with the vomiting. Tell us more about it. Well, it was one episode 3 days ago. Okay. Now let's move on to the diarrhea. It's been loose for the last 24 hours. We're eating, we're drinking, bright, alert, playful, actively in puppy classes and training, and on all preventatives and up to date on vaccines. So in the dialogue of this conversation, we're asking, have you contacted your primary veterinarian? And she said, well, I know I've got to go in, but they can't see me for 3 weeks. So they called their reception staff, and we all know this one, right? We've got a receptionist or maybe even a technician who picks up that phone, and the presenting complaint was 3 days of GI symptoms, right? So we're starting there. And of course, the person on the other end of that phone says, yep, you need an appointment, but unfortunately we can't see you, so go to ER. Well, that's expensive and hard for a lot of people. So she reached out to us. And at that point, we had to pivot and present a mild, GI. We're going to assume this is dietary indiscretion because of the puppy classes and getting lots of different types of treats. Give you a whole bunch of information on bland diet and follow up with you and make sure that it's actually improving. And sure enough, next day, issue completely resolved. Just changing up the diet, resting it, completely resolved. Post follow-up, additionally, doing an additional survey a week later, the owner reported that the pet was perfect. It was like nothing had ever happened. But we wrapped that with a whole bunch of education around when you have to worry. So that was that scenario. And then I didn't want to go puppy heavy, but I will tell you that our data shows that there are a lot of puppies that we're getting calls about since COVID. So that's another interesting piece. So the next scenario is a gentleman calling with a 6-month-old dog having a seizure on his report. This is a Sunday morning at about 8 a.m.
Can you describe what the pet is doing, please?
I love you, Melissa. You're fantastic. And that's exactly where the brain went, right? That is exactly where the brain went. And then I think this is really important when we're talking about telehealth. So that's why I'm highlighting this as a case. He's panicking, and I mean truly panicking, like hysterical. And we kind of back up for a second, try to get him to calm down. Most seizures will not be fatal, right? Starting in that place, get in their mindset, assume they're right, and find out a little bit more. The puppy was on its back, next to his lap, on a blanket. And at some point in the dialogue, he told us that it was his first dog, which gave us a lot of clues. First dog ever. And the technician who handled the call said, sir, can you touch the dog and see if it wakes up? See if this twitching that you're seeing stops. And sure enough, it did. The dog was dreaming. And we took that opportunity, though, knowing that he is a first-time pet owner, to then educate him on what needs to be done for that dog, right? He didn't know anything about the fact that a dog could dream. He didn't know anything about having to get vaccines, or not be taking the dog to the dog park, which he was doing because it hadn't been vaccinated for anything yet. All of those things that a new pet owner doesn't necessarily know. And I mean, there's a lot of technicians on this call, so you all know we can't take anything for granted. But you know, we do, I think, tend to take for granted the level of education that people go into pet ownership with.
So I love this because it shows kind of when pet owners are seeking information, if they have access to that number, they're going to call, they're going to be seeking it out. But I do think it'd be great to turn it over to Dr. Cheryl from doctor to doctor to have a conversation about what happens in private practice. So Dr. Cheryl is in private practice. Obviously, so is Dr. Audrey. So let's dive into that about first, like kind of what's changed for you in private practice for both of you. And then let's go into some scenarios.
Yeah, so I'll just start and say, you know, I started doing telemedicine about a year or two before the COVID hit, and that was because of going to the VIS, to Veterinary Innovation Summit, and meeting some of the telemedicine platform peeps, and you know, starting to understand that, yeah, I need to be paid for my advice. So we started to, you know, do telemedicine at my practice, and, you know, all of the things that I used to give away for free, just talking to people on the phone and, you know, counseling them without having them come in, which I did a lot, was now I was able to monetize and be paid for what I was talking to them about. So, you know, anything from, you know, why is my pet itching? What is this bump? What is this lump? What is this weird skin condition? Why is he acting like that? Has turned into telemedicine. And now with COVID, and we're not out of it yet, but doing a lot more with telemedicine, of course, being able to get those patients seen, you know, video tapes and pictures through telemedicine versus having to have them come in, because we really don't have the time to see every single patient. So that's where I am now. I'm loving being able to, my you know, upfront staff come back and say, my team members say, Mrs. Jones needs to get in, her dog's vomiting and diarrhea. I said, telemedicine, let me talk to them, you know, and be able to help them out. And if it's something that really needs to come in, then we'll either try and do a squeeze in, or they will send them to the ER, although ER's of course super busy too, and they're having issues. But so many, telemedicine has just been so amazing. And I'm going to pass it to Audrey because she's doing even way more than I am with her telemedicine.
Yeah, and I think Cheryl, you know, as I built PetFolk, we really had the opportunity to build a consumer-centric brand from the ground up, and so had the chance to live outside of the guardrails and the lines that that legacy practices had, and understanding that there is a consumer-driven mindset, that connectivity is very important and very impactful. And I think the modern pet parent, for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is the new position of the pet as kind of the center of a family ecosystem, people really need guidance, and they want it when they want it, and they want it for them as a convenience. And so building PetFolk, for us, there were three verticals. There was brick and mortar, mobile, and then an ecosystem of 24/7 virtual care to surround customers. And I have said for a number of years, meeting the customer where they want to be met. And we all know that there is a variety of barriers, not the least of which is time for all of us. And so, you know, kids and dogs and cats never get sick in a timely fashion. And people truly just need somebody to direct them that has a little bit more knowledge and guidance to be able to tell them if things are emergent, semi-emergent, not emergent at all. And to the conversation earlier, I think there's a ton of opportunities where people will end up in emergency rooms because a dog is dreaming, or because we have a reverse sneeze, or for a variety of reasons. And, you know, at the beginning of COVID, which also strangely coincided with the beginning of PetFolk, just had this huge mindset that the world needed to look at delivery care models with a different center and a different philosophy. And, you know, the world of I say, you do, the paternalistic traditional veterinary model is broken. And for all of the complexities of shortages, I think we need to recognize that we've got to change the way that we're going to interact with our consumers and how we're going to take care of pets. So one of our biggest focuses with PetFolk was to create truly a vertical that was specifically surrounded in telemedicine. And like I said, we had the luxury to build something from the ground up, and hired an incredibly intelligent individual by the name of Antoinette Martin, who came in and said, I believe in all things digital. Let me be your superpower that can create this. And, you know, 90% of our interactions end up with a prescription or an action. We picked the state of North Carolina to start, which anybody who understands regulation understands that we probably picked the wrong state for telemedicine. But we believe wholeheartedly that if we can be A players in North Carolina, we can do anything anywhere. So we're practicing within the lines. We are dotting all the I's and crossing all the T's. And there are some complexities around that because pet parents want more. They may not have the VCPR, so we have to play within the boundaries of the regulatory bodies of North Carolina, and we have to conform to saying, hey, we need to see you in person before we can really do anything outside of advice and guidance. But I think what we're really understanding is a modern pet parent is absolutely in love with what we're doing. You know, we have NPS net promoter scores, which basically tell us, would you refer your veterinarian to a friend? We are off the charts, as is Whiskerdocs. People are in love with telemedicine. And I think at some point in time as an industry, we have to recognize that consumers will drive choice. And we have people who are not getting care for a variety of reasons that Deb has discussed. Access to care is no longer about money or about geography. Access to care is the bandwidth of our contemporaries simply don't have the available hours to serve a population of pets that needs to be served. How are we guiding people into emergency rooms? How are we guiding people into their GPs? And how are we sometimes solving these things virtually? And I think we have to take a step back as an industry and realize that that we have some big problems that we have to solve for. And you know, I think the really big learnings, Cheryl, have been that the consumer is wanting what we're giving, and we are managing all kinds of cases. It's no secret that vomiting and diarrhea and behavior and nutrition and puppies and kittens and basic care are a huge coefficient of what we're dealing with. But I think you can also say, how are we managing chronic care? How are we managing end of life considerations? How are we managing some of these really heavy conversations that truly require, hey, I'm giving my dog insulin. Am I doing this correctly? What are the things that I need to do better in order to have a successful outcome? Hey, I didn't really understand the 900 things that I got told at a visit today because my pet is really sick. How can we work through some of those things? And so, as you can tell, I'm super passionate about this subject because I really do believe that this is serving a huge inherent need. And the veterinary industry needs to also recognize that we're being judged by our customers, and when they can't come and see us and when they can't get problems solved in a reasonable and timely fashion, regardless of money, we are harming ourselves, and we are not looking good to the outside world. And I think we can all agree that when customers believe in something and they're not getting what they want, they may just figure out how to do it differently and go around us. So
You know, Audrey,
that's a bit of a speech, Cheryl.
No, I was just going to pop in just for a second, and two things. The end of life, you know, conversations are so important, and you need to be able to take your time. And I have found that being able to have conversations with my people, whether it's asynchronously through telemedicine or synchronously doing live video with them, when they want to do it and they don't have to make an appointment and it's like 2 or 3 days down the road. I want to be able to have it now when they have the need. That is so important. And then the other thing that I have found, you know, when people tell me when they come in, they're like, oh, I came to you because my friend so-and-so said they loved you or whatever. I'm having almost an equal number of people who have been telling me lately that they are coming to us because we offer telemedicine. And that's huge.
So let me jump in because I know we're going to do another scenario, but I'm looking at time and I really want to get to some of these questions. And so I do want to, before I'm going to ask Mark some questions, I want to ask both Cheryl and Dr. Audrey, when you are having conversations and you do have to bring up the VCPR, I know it's not as much for you, Cheryl, because you're in Michigan, but does the pet owner know what that is?
No,
They have
don't
no
get it.
idea.
So
and they get mad. They're like, what are you talking about? Why?
So I think it's a good segue for us to kind of go into some of our hurdles. And so if we are becoming a pet-centric society and we are being driven by what the pet owner is wanting, can I ask a question? When did the VCPR get created? Was that about the same? Was that in 2016?
No, it was Abraham Lincoln was president. He was fond of animals. No, it's real simple, and you don't have to go to law school to understand this at all. The VCPR was created, the term, and by the way, New York doesn't have a VCPR. All right, so if people wonder why is New York an open, free telemedicine state, they don't have a VCPR in the law. The VCPR was created for one reason only. It wasn't to protect pet owners from bad veterinarians. It wasn't to protect veterinarians from themselves. It was to enable the state agency, the Board of Veterinary Medicine, to go after the license of a veterinarian because they could pin down and say, Dr. Cushing, I am a doctor of jurisprudence, I'll just use me as an example, but Dr. Cushing, we're coming after you because you were the veterinarian of record for Fluffy, and Fluffy died during an ear exam, and that shouldn't have happened. So we're going to have a license proceeding. It was a legal mechanism to create the basis for the state to say, we want your license back, period. And what we've done, Catherine, in this whole debate about telemedicine is turn the VCPR, and I'll be real quick here. We should have a door that invites people into the veterinary care system, right? Oh, you've got a pet, you've got a puppy, you have questions. Let me open the door. Come on in. Oh, the door is electronic. Come in that way. You used a carrier pigeon. That's fine. You rode in on a donkey. That's great. I don't care how you came in. Come on in, and we'll see if we can't help you. The notion of turning the VCPR into this wall you have to climb up to make sure you're in a clinic before you can say the simple question, doctor, could you help me here? And that's Deb's point. That's Cheryl's point. That's Audrey's point. You're trying to help a pet owner who's desperate. And they're probably highly educated and desperate because they have no clue what's going on inside of a 14-pound dog. And they want some guidance and to say, you know what? Love to help. Would just kill to help you. But get in your car, come in 3 weeks, and we'll see what we can do. If that is the system you're in and that's the system you're defending, let me tell you, that's the dictionary definition of dysfunction. That is a system that's broken and does not work anymore. And you know what is important with consumers? They're not going to worry about getting caught. They're going to figure out a different way to get an answer. So the VCPR was a tool to go after vet's license that we've turned into a, sorry, you can't make it, which means the following. And Audrey and Deb have heard me say this so many times. You take an elderly woman in an urban apartment who's got a cat. Let me ask you this. You know she's never going under the bed to get the cat to put in a carrier to go down 8 floors of her apartment to get in a cab to go to a vet. You know that's never going to happen. So is it better that she never get any veterinary care, or could we tolerate her getting on FaceTime because her daughter gave her a computer, iPhone, showed her how to use it to get some medical advice? I've never had a veterinarian stand up and say, you know what? It'd be better if she didn't get any care at all. You know why you wouldn't say that publicly? Because the laughter and derision from your peers would be so intense, you'd go, what am I doing here? So, I mean, that's kind of where we are with the VCPR. We've enshrined it, and it was meant to be a legal tool to get a license back from a bad vet.
So I am curious because a couple of people are jumping in. Shay's talking about California in the chat and how, tremendously challenging. She has to establish a VCPR every single time they talk to whether it's your pet owner and that it comes into your practice or not. So within these 7 states that currently don't have, that you currently are able to practice telemedicine, how long did it take for us to get to that point? Because the question is, we have so many other states here and we have the majority of when we look at Texas is not on there, California is not on there, you're looking at big mass population states. Illinois is not on there. So I am kind of curious, like, what does this mean in the timeline for this to change for us as we're looking to address our challenges? And are we just constantly pushing this issue to the side and burying it because we figure we'll have other?
Eleanor has her hand up. Eleanor,
Oh,
did you
go,
have something to
Eleanor.
say?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, I was going to ask the group 2 questions, and then I'm going to answer them before you have a chance to answer them. All right. So the first question is, how many of you are using telemedicine? All of you. Okay, good. And whether you know you are or aren't, you are. And the second question I have is, how many of you are using a virtual VCPR? And the answer is all of you, whether you know it or not. You're all doing it already. We have all done it, because there are circumstances when animals need our help that we go outside of these laws that we're talking about, and hopefully they'll change in order to do that. So I just want to make that comment as we go forward about this conversation with the virtual VCPR, that we're all doing it now.
Hey, Mark, can you list the 7 states that allow the virtual
Yeah.
VCPR again?
Yeah, but again, there's a reason why Eleanor was dean at A&M. That's just such a classically true point, and generally reality trumps speculation. So I mean, that's thank you, Eleanor, for saying that. The 7 states, for different reasons, and to Catherine, your question, they didn't spend 10 years in a task force. But human medicine, by the way, in some states it took 25 years to get to the right answer, because they wanted to wait till they were the last state. And Eleanor's from one of the last states, Texas, on the human side. And there's lots of reasons. And this isn't the program to get into what motivates, organizations to oppose this, but we'll just put that aside. So in the 7 states, they have different histories. Idaho, recently, their board made it clear in board regulations. Michigan, the board adopted these a few years back, and the Michigan VMA is trying to roll that back to a you can't have a telemedicine VCPR. So in Michigan, we're still in a battle. The board regulations say you can. And the VMA wants to pull that back. New York doesn't have a VCPR, so you can't say in New York, did you get a VCPR or not? Because the answer is it doesn't matter in New York. New Jersey, board regulations. Virginia, for all practitioners, including veterinarians, basically said telemedicine can be utilized, including for controlled substances. And it was an attempt to just kind of have all the healthcare practitioners be the same. That wasn't that long ago. Florida has had a law, interestingly, that said that VCPR, it doesn't have to be in person, but for prescriptions, it would have to be. So that limitation.
Correct.
And then in Oklahoma, they just passed a new law, and the AVMA and I disagree about this, but I'll just say we disagree about this, but Oklahoma's law does not mandate an in-person exam. So ironically, and Shay Cox, who lots of us know and all of us admire, Shay's in the Bay Area in California, and whatever one thinks about California's politics, it has one of the most conservative views of the VCPR regime and telemedicine that you can find in the country, interestingly. And there is a lawsuit that the San Francisco SPCA has brought against the California Vet Med Board, challenging their position on the VCPR. So we'll see what happens there. But what tends to happen, and Eleanor knows this because she's worked at schools across the country, states wait and they're told by others, hang in there, and then suddenly the dam breaks in 3, 4, 5 states, or situations occur and people just say, we can't work with this regime, and they move the other direction. And that's already occurring. And I can tell you in conversations, people are just saying, particularly in the light of the shortage, it's just not a sustainable argument to say that people couldn't use telemedicine to get some help. And by the way, since a veterinarian can say, no, I don't want to do it that way, fine, just find somebody who is comfortable. So
I think one of the things that I think is most challenging for many people to understand is it seems to make sense. We have the shortage. We also have the need from the pet owners. What seems to be the dividing point? So I guess I don't quite understand that.
I can
piece
answer it.
still.
Yeah,
Okay.
I'm going to throw it out there and let the group debate it. Here's the answer. I hear all the time. I've debated telemedicine for 6 years. In-person visits are better. It's better if the pet's in front of you. I want to put aside whether it is or not. I'll concede that it may be better. The issue isn't it better. The issue is if a veterinarian's comfortable providing care and guidance without the pet being in front of her, should she be allowed to do it? And in a scenario where you can't even get in to be seen for that, quote, better veterinary medicine, it's a theoretical debate. That's the argument you hear. You don't hear it. You hear it, it's going to harm people, but the evidence, or harm pets, but the evidence is just overwhelming, as in unanimous. It hasn't done that. So that's the argument you hear, Catherine. I'm open it to the whole group to want to jump in on that debate, but that's really the crux of it's just better if you're in the clinic.
But are we?
Mark,
Oh, go ahead.
I keep having this wish, I guess, that somehow we could infuse in all our conversations that our real job is to influence the behavior and the ability of the pet owner to take good care of their pet. I think that so many of our conversations are about advancing the profession, and I agree with that, but I think really, if we shift slightly, we'll find that by doing that, we do elevate the profession, because we'll develop the tools, we'll develop the stuff, we'll have the regs, we'll have all the stuff that's needed to do a better job. And I think that we need to pay more attention, this industry needs to pay more attention to what the pet owner needs from us. And everybody hit it. Audrey, I think Audrey's model, the PetFolk model, is killing it because of that. And these conversations about personalized medicine and taking into account what someone's financial wherewithal is, what their resources are, how they feel, all these things that became important. By the way, this happened on the human side. This did develop over time, that actually belief systems became part of a risk assessment example, right? So I think I want us to start having more conversations about being advocates for what the pet owner needs from all of us.
Well, I will say too, and Eleanor Green has this amazing quote that she often says is, if you're not going to jump on board, get out of the way so we can get things done. Something to that effect. I don't mean to quickly put it into other, very simple terms. But one of the things that I noticed is I was at Super Zoo, and there were more diagnostics that they are now selling at the retail level for pet owners to purchase, to analyze urine, to be able to do all these things at home to bypass going into the veterinary hospital. And so, I mean, Ken, you're here on the call. I know you've got a great thing that's going to be managing for nutrition, to be helping, to look at the diagnostics of the pet. So I know we've got the technology that is existing. So again, Eleanor, I know you can say it far better than I can, but there is that statement of it's happening. And so we've got to find some way to be able to figure out how to get the naysayers, which I'm still perplexed by at this particular point in time with so many issues coming forward. I do want to open it up for any additional questions before we do our final toast, because I did say I'd have you out of here by 55. So we have 4 minutes left, and I want to be sure. Any final thoughts or anything?
So I want to jump in and just, Melissa, do you have any specific questions about?
Well, I was happy to listen. I haven't been able to attend. I mean, they do telemedicine. Got interrupted twice during this call for it. Had to pause. But I don't necessarily agree with you guys with some of the VCPRs from being in. I have 5 licenses in different states. In Florida, oh my God, was the weirdest one with people manipulating law. And I'm concerned for the pet owner and the quality that they get, and concerned about the variability that they're seeing from what a veterinarian is. And I don't think just releasing the VCPR at this moment solves it. But I do agree that we need to meet the pet owner with what they want. I just don't see the current way we do it perfect, but I'm not seeing a free-for-all. And from talking to my folks in human medicine about the telemedicine that they do, they don't like it. And they have more problems with telemedicine than we've had. But I mean, I think it's huge for the future of veterinary medicine, but I don't have the exact answer from the shift. And I'm very concerned about the political backing that this group has. And, I don't want to see our licenses manipulated. That's, I guess, what I'm trying to say. But I agree with you. It is, I get great joy out of doing telemedicine. I mean, we do brick and mortar, we do house calls, we do telemedicine. Shoot, we had the hurricane. So you talk about disaster and doing telemedicine. It is what it is. You take care of the people and take care of the pets. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're here for. I mean, that's what I'm here for, and I'm glad to hear the rest of the group. But I definitely am confused about the legal aspect and how the different states have handled it, and would love to see us do it even better than human medicine. And I just happened to be with a couple Canadian vets last week, and they said it is not as big of a deal, but I don't know the current state of those guys for getting into practices, et cetera. From the people I talked with, they had availability, but they also squeeze them in. But telemedicine lets us squeeze people in, and I would love to see the people that quit this field be able to continue to work in some capacity for us.
I love that
Thank you
other
so
point
much.
too. It's important that we're also sharing all the different sides as we do this. So thank you. I know the
Eleanor
funny
has
part is
another.
you have a little bit of an echo. So when this comes through, you are really coming through. So Eleanor, I'll turn it over to you.
Yeah, I love those comments, and thank you so much. And by the way, you're from my hometown of Tampa, so go Gasparilla. But anyway, I guess I would say that, a lot of the concerns that we're experiencing veterinary medicine have happened over the 39 years that human medicine has had, and all exactly the same. We can just layer them right down. So I think one thing we can do is take advantage of the lessons in human medicine, and actually the feedback is fabulous. I mean, 97% of primary care physicians offer it. The acceptance rate and satisfaction rate is off the charts, like 85, 90%. It's really, really good. And I think the one thing we need to remember is that the whole premise is the veterinarian's judgment. We train good veterinarians, they graduate, and then we rely on them. We're not trying to do all this for them. It's not a free-for-all, it's a veterinarian's judgment. And every case isn't going to be good for telemedicine. Every telemedicine case can't be taken care of with a virtual VCPR, but a veterinarian can make that judgment. And the other thing that's so important about that is none of these things are going to make a good veterinarian a bad veterinarian, and they're not going to make a bad veterinarian a good veterinarian. And so I think when we get a little more comfort, just as they've done in the human profession, about what fits, what doesn't, what's comfortable, what isn't, our own judgment is going to lead the way. Just one more comment I hate to say, because I've said this so many times before, but we have to be so careful not to fence ourselves in, not to fence the ethical veterinarians in, that then drive our clients to the unethical ones because they can't get what they want from us. Let us take care of them. Let us make that judgment and that decision. And I think it's going to be better for everyone. And yet I understand the concerns. Number one concern from veterinarians with telemedicine and the VCPR is what's legal and what isn't. And that's an area we need to really clear up. So thank you so much for bringing up that great
So
point.
I lied, we're over a little. So Mark, one final thought, and then I'm going to turn it over to Deb to do our closing toast, but final thoughts from you, Mark?
Yeah, great. I'd encourage everybody here who has a question. I don't want to destroy your weekend, but reach out to Sharon Quinn in Ontario. 15 million people. It's fifth biggest state in the US if it was a state. It's a modern, sophisticated state. It's right next to Michigan, and it's worked there. So if you have a question about how it's worked, and doctor, your good questions and concerns and preference for, in person if you can, the two have worked together. It hasn't been a bloodbath. It hasn't been a fight even. It's been navigated and really professionally in Ontario, and Sharon would be one that can tell you that. The last point I'd make is that 50 states with human lives at risk and the whole Medicare system and all that underlying it would not have said yes to telemedicine if it didn't work. I'm just telling you that. Veterinary medicine does not know something that human medicine didn't know and doesn't know. And nothing's perfect, okay? Including Zoom. Nothing's perfect. But just remember that. Human medicine has worked their way through to 50 states in this country. And ask yourself the question, is it really not work for pets? Are veterinarians so special that analogy can't work? That's just a concluding thought. Make your own judgment on that. But I think that's ultimately what's going to cause this process to just hopefully not take 25 years. But if it does, it's 25 years well spent. Catherine, it's all yours.
Okay, so we're sending it over to Deb because Deb knows she has to do one last public speaking, and then she doesn't have to do it again. So, okay, raise your glass.
That's not my thing. But with
Everybody.
wine, it's better, I found. So anyway, I want to say, I want to finish and circle back to Mark, to open minds, and I want to add, and brave hearts. This is a journey and a warrior. We are warriors, and it's a journey worth taking. And take some risks. Go forward. We're behind you. All of us are a team together. And so much to thank you to the Bridge Club for bringing us together. This is a really important conversation. Cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers. Thanks
my-
everybody for being here.
And thank you for the being able to talk forward. I truly do appreciate it. Mark, thank you for your ongoing sponsorship and support of us. And with that, guys, because we're right there, 8 o'clock. Okay, or 9 o'clock or 7 for some of you, if we all know how to do our time changes. Everyone have a great evening. Thank you for coming.